We're still talking.
I know. Save it.
Say, okay.
Turn your phones off, please, or down.
So I got some time left.
And microphone's on, so Randy can hear us. I'll give us a gavel, so that everybody knows it's actually 1:01. This is a Marquette Township Board Budget Work Session. Today is Wednesday, October 23rd, 2019. And we're gonna talk about public works, possible restructuring of public works and their budget. Take it away, somebody.
Just want to say it was a very nice narrative they did.
Yes,
Made it a lot easier.
outstanding, absolutely. And the proposal for restructuring was very clear to understand. And we have a chart, which Bernie likes. He likes the colors and the,
I like color.
yeah.
Well, I can still see them.
Well, I guess to kind of kick it off, in response to board requests at the last work session that we had and ongoing concerns regarding staffing, scheduling, overtime, a variety of issues in public works that were kind of outside of the budget, but still items of discussion. You have been presented and have before you the revised budgets for water, wastewater, solid waste in the revised format for the narrative and the budgets that you were looking for, we think, that you were looking for, so we're looking for your input on that. And also an updated version of a potential restructuring of the public works operations staff, basically, to better provide coverage from an extended period of time to 8 o'clock in the evening, and increase in staff to do that. So I guess with that, I would open the floor to any questions that the board has that either myself or the superintendent twins could address.
I got a question for insurance.
Yeah,
We're reducing insurance. We're
reducing
reducing
insurance.
insurance on some of these in here, reduce benefits and that stuff like that. How did the insurance come out?
It hasn't yet. We have not received, no,
Usually
we're
it's October
based,
time we do
well,
that.
we haven't received it yet. It's
Okay.
everything, all the insurance data that's in your budgets still is the 2019 data because we've not received our renewal information as yet. Where you see reductions in it is because we have changes in staffing. You know, Kirk's going to be going off, John's going to be coming on, we have Ida going off, and Ryan coming on, and there are different levels of coverage and different costs. But what you see in wages and in the benefits are predicated on 2019.
Do you want to talk about the budget first, or does anybody have any questions about that, or you want to look at the restructuring?
To the left.
Yes, sir.
Budget.
Turn on my
Budget,
light.
yeah.
Budget, okay.
Yeah. I have some general questions and comments, and hopefully will lead into a larger discussion.
On which one? Okay.
Are we
The
talking water?
general in nature, and we'll get more specific in a minute.
Okay.
First is the fact that we haven't fully implemented the definitions that were approved on July 16th.
Okay,
The next one is that it's the 50-year life expectancy that's being used as opposed to 75. The next one is separation of the replacement and improvement department or account into two separate departments or accounts. And finally, the where the budgeted replacement funds end up after the year's end. Where exactly do they go and what are they earmarked for? And I guess to start off, I would start off with the definitions. And what I haven't really looked for the miscellaneous numbers in the budget to see if they're the 2 and the 5% that was defined in the definition. One thing we are missing in the miscellaneous account is the amount or the percentage that was supposed to be put on there that dictates that they be moved to a separate account. The other one is the contingency account funding level percentage hasn't been determined yet. And while I agree that a fully funded emergency reserve department would not necessarily be part of the budget, an emergency reserve department that is not fully funded should be found within the budget demonstrating what level of funding is going to it in this budget year. But I don't see an emergency reserve department defined in there. To do with the life expectancy, the 50 versus 75 years, the last budget session, it was suggested that a heading change would be all that would be sufficient, or that would be sufficient for that, because it wouldn't have any immediate impact on the budget. But when I go in and check it, if you look specifically at pages 590-12 and page 591-14, that's wastewater and water. The budget impact I see by replacing 50 years with 75 years is an approximate $20,000 and $30,000 to the budget respectively. It would reduce it by that much. So that's, in just those two funds, that's $50,000. So I don't know why, now this was directed almost a year and something ago, that 75 years be used until a better number was presented by either an approved asset management program or historical data could be provided to document what the actual life expectancy was. We said until that happened we were going to use 75 years, but I don't see it plugged in any place yet. And the other place that it's not plugged in and that doesn't have a direct impact on the budget is pages 590-13 and 591-15, which is just the, let's see what the title is on it. It's the water improvements and the wastewater improvements summary. Those are still set in the 50 years. I mean, it's a number entry in this case. And over on the previous page, for example, on 590-12, the number of spots that are in there where there's 50 years in useful life, the way the per year figures are derived at are the cost figures in the first column are divided by the useful life figures in the second column, and you arrive at the per year cost. That's the per year cost in this particular one, that's wastewater, that if you apply 75 years instead of 50 years, takes that bottom number, that 277,563, and drops it $20-some thousand. That the budget would be adjusted downward. And you've got about a $30,000 adjustment downwards in the water budget when you do that. Now, that figure, that 277,563, and I think it's on 591.14, there's an amount of 223,572, and I just misspoke myself. It's $30,000 on that first page, 590-12, and it's $20,000 on that other page, 591.14. Those two numbers appear in the replacement and improvement departments, and they're put together with the approved CIPs. In the wastewater, there's no approved CIPs, so there's nothing being added to that. But in the water, there's approved CIPs that amount to $38,334, and those are put together to arrive at the figure that is in the replacement and improvement department, and I think it's 591, yeah, it's page 591-12 underwater, that brings that up to $261,906 is what's in that budget. Which brings me to my next point, the third point, is that department, the replacement and improvement department, we've talked about it before, about separating it somehow so that replacement is in one spot and improvement is in the other spot. And the reason is, and I would use this as the example, if we have $223,572 in the replacement portion of that fund we're looking at on 591-12. And of that is $38,334 in improvements that we're going to spend this year. If we go over on the 338 or the 38,334 expense for the improvements, where's the overage come from? It comes right out of the replacement and improvement, and there's really no board involvement in that because it's in the same account, same budget. There's not a budget amendment. It just reduces the replacement funds that are in that. It would be my hope that we could, if we don't want to separate the replacement and improvement department into two departments, a replacement department and improvement department, then at least take the account underneath that department and make two accounts, which would be a replacement account and an improvement account.
And then they roll them up together.
Well, they're gonna come up together anyway, but what that says is that we go over budget in the improvement account. It at least takes a budget amendment that has to be recognized and somebody has to do something with it at the board level so that we know where the money went. And the other thing it does is it would necessitate that under that same department that there would be a contingency account that comes out of the definitions. That would be a percentage, which yet has to be determined, that money would come out of if there's an overrun on the improvements account. And so I'm just not sure why we just don't move ahead and do that. It's not that difficult. It's adding one account. It's changing one account, splitting it and making two accounts, which is going to necessitate putting a contingency account in there to take care of any budget overruns. And it keeps everything up front. I'm not suggesting anybody's doing anything that they shouldn't be doing. I'm just suggesting that an overrun and the improvements department can just take a few dollars out of the replacement account and nothing's required on the part of the board. It just happens and it's gone. The last thing is where that replacement money goes at year's end. I'm assuming it drops into the
Retained earnings.
what do we call them?
Retained earnings.
Retained earnings. But when they get there, they're not earmarked for anything as far as I know.
Correct.
When you look at the retained earnings summary, which is on page, it's in there twice actually, it's on page 591-17. I'm assuming that these years and the retained earnings that are there, that's the rolling total from one year to the next, and it fluctuates rather wildly. One year it changes $500,000, it goes down, and I think I know what happened that year, but nonetheless, I would think that, and we've talked about this before, that we need to take those retained earnings and categorize them, break them down, if you will, as to what they're earmarked for. A good portion of that is earmarked for replacement money, which is the same thing we were talking about 6-7 months ago about setting up an account so that we could have replacement money in this account so that when it comes time to replace some of this in-ground infrastructure, there's money sitting there to do it. Well, in fact, we don't know how much money's sitting there to do it because we don't keep track of it. It just goes into the retained earnings. We need to change that. we need to put those into separate accounts, so the total doesn't need to change. I mean, you can still have, 12/31/2018, you can still have under wastewater, 1,973,000, but underneath that, it should be broken down as to how much of that is for what department. And we have retained earnings for restricted and unrestricted for 2 funds. Are there any retained earnings for any other funds? Are there retained earnings under the general fund?
Yeah, everything has its own
Okay.
pocket when you get finished with that account.
I'm just suggesting we're way overdue to categorize the pockets.
Those pockets don't appear in your annual budget or in the balance sheet.
I know it, I know it.
Yeah.
But-
The accountant has those on the balance sheet.
And all I'm saying is that they should be broken out so that you can see how much of any given, and for example, when we end up this year, 2019, there's gonna be some money from the replacement account that I figured out, and there'll be money coming from someplace else that goes into the retained earnings. I would just think that when the retained earnings summary sheet comes out that has that amount on there that got moved, it represents a new total in retained earnings, that below that there would be a breakdown of where the money is. What account that money is being earmarked for. Some of it's being earmarked for replacement, some of it's being earmarked for wastewater replacement, some is for water replacement, some is for something else, but it's earmarked for something.
No, it's not, is it?
That's what I'm
It's
saying.
not earmarked for it.
It's not, it
Yeah,
should be.
It's just put in there. Well, that's fine, we can.
Because
But that would happen before it hits the retained earnings account, in my mind. You would,
when it, at the end of the year, it gets
Mm-hmm.
put someplace, but before it can get put someplace, you have to have some place to put it, so you have to
Right.
define all that.
that's what I mean.
And the first thing you gotta do is take the 12/31/2018 retained earnings summaries and break that out and decide where all that gets divided up to. And then, then it's just a matter of adding to it at the end of the next year. But I would think we're way past time of doing that. We've talked about it for almost a year now.
We weren't focusing on the retained earnings so much as we were talking about the individual accounts and earmarking the money that was in those specific accounts, which is
Well, and it's
how they've
pretty
been
much,
defined now.
everything we talked about doing is done. And it's all arriving in the retained earnings and just kind of lounging around in there. We just need to define where it is, what it's earmarked for. So that when you're trying to decide what do you have in the water replacement fund, you can look at the retained earnings summary and see what's there. Exactly.
Well, we may decide to just dump it in retained earnings and just keep it. It doesn't have to all be earmarked.
I would not agree with that. Because that just means that anytime we get a brainstorm of an idea, we can dip in there and haul it away, and the next thing you know, we don't have the money to do some replacement of infrastructure when it's due.
Well, we can say that any overage then goes into the replacement and/or
And no,
improvement.
it doesn't matter where it goes. If it goes where it was intended to go, and the $223,000 or whatever it is that it's in the water fund at the end of this year, if that's what's still there, should go into the replacement retained earnings fund. And it should increase whatever is in there now by $232,000, whatever it is, dollars. But it should, that doesn't mean that the board can't go in and say there's a greater priority that's arisen, and therefore we're gonna move some of that money. But seems to me we're being more responsible if we can honestly look at that and decide to move that money out of the replacement to someplace else where it's needed more, and do it by board action as opposed to just taking it out of retained earnings and we're not really sure what it come out of. We just know that it come out of this big gob of money sitting out there,
account, yeah.
earning 0.08% interest.
Yeah, that's
So,
right.
those are my comments.
Okay, you want to repeat that?
I
I'm sorry,
have
I'm
them
not making
written
light of
down
what you
if you want
said.
to.
Yes, that's probably good. I think some of that discussion John was not privy to because that was before he got here, as far as how we're trying to, earmark's the best word because it's not assigned and it's not restricted. We had round numbers, 200,000 we were putting into repair and improvement, and we didn't end up using that, so it just got dumped in a pile somewhere. And we have been asking for years, what's in that pile? Is it 200,000 for one project? Is it 50 for this one and 20 for this one? Part of the CIP, turnover every year. The money doesn't get spent. Where is it? So that's what we've been trying to define before you even got here. And that's part of it. It was detailing the definitions and making sure we were all on the same page with trying to figure out what's a miscellaneous account, what's a contingency account, where's the money going when we don't spend it this year. And we hadn't really talked too much about retained earnings. It was more about the specific accounts, the repair and improvement or
Right, and I guess why I bring up the retained earnings portion is it becomes obvious when you go through the budget that it's already there. We just need to separate or subdivide the retained earnings account and earmark it for the specific things that it should be earmarked for, which would probably end up to be a couple pages worth of stuff, but whatever it's earmarked for, it should be earmarked for. The replacement, for example, the replacement account in the water department under retained earnings would have probably $1 million or so in it. Underneath that, that could be further divided into which one of those projects that money has been collected for. Based on what the asset management program comes up and says.
And you could almost say that we're gonna keep 10% or whatever number in retained earnings every year, or not, but I'm just thinking about earmarking it.
Well, but it all stays in retained earnings, we're just talking
It doesn't
about
have
dividing
to.
it up.
Right, it doesn't have to. If you're gonna have, there's no point in having it sit in an account if you're gonna have it earmarked for some kind of a project. And goes back to the CIP again.
Well, and that would go to my last question is we haven't, I don't see the emergency reserve department in the budget yet, which was part of that motion that was approved. And there's supposed to be 33% in the general fund and 25% in the water and wastewater funds go into there. And I would think that once that is funded, if we had 33% of the general fund budget funded in the emergency reserve fund, that it would not appear in the budget because we're not putting any money in it. But if we only have 30% and we're still trying to build that fund up, that the amount that's going into that in this year's budget would show up under the emergency reserve fund in a line item, a budget.
Well, but again, those funds won't show in your annual budget. Those are balance sheet entries.
But the money that's going into there out of this year's budget would show.
No, it wouldn't. What you have in your annual budget is what's anticipated to come in revenue and where it's being expended. It does not reference reserve accounts or anything. Those are balance sheet items.
But if out of the $10 worth of taxes I'm getting this year, if $1 worth of that tax is going to shore up that emergency reserve fund, doesn't that have to appear in the budget to show that it went there?
It will go out of the budget as a transfer out, but it won't reflect specifically where it's being transferred to. It transfers out to the fund balance that is maintained on the balance sheet, which is where it's broken out, on the balance sheet, not in the budget. The budget only references what you're bringing in for operations for this particular year and what's going out for expenditures.
So the emergency reserve fund would never appear on the budget, but it would appear
On the balance sheet.
on the balance sheet.
Yes.
And you want to know what projects that earnings are going towards.
Yeah, as of for instance, if you look at the general fund, if you look at the general fund budget, I think it's like $134,000 or something like that is left over in the general fund as excess revenue. That then goes to the balance sheet in the spread, to wherever the board is designating that it's being spread to, whether it's, such a percent goes to the emergency fund or the reserve fund. Once the reserve fund is at, and I'm talking about the 3 months,
Mhm.
3 months, once that is achieved, nothing more is going in there. That sits. So that money then gets spread elsewhere in the balance sheet.
Okay, I just,
Either to
I
fund
don't
balance or
remember
to whatever.
in my 3 years so far that we've ever addressed that.
No, we never
We
have,
haven't.
because it's just an automatic. It's just, Lois just takes it.
That's just an accounting thing that happens, but if
Yeah.
we want it to change, we can change it.
Yeah, and what's happened in the last 3 budgets is a piece of that has gone, the excess has been spread to either repay the solid waste fund, and I designate that in the transmittal as a recommendation to the board, and then the board accepts it, Lois takes it and puts it there.
It happens, yeah. So in my mind, to follow what you're saying, at the end of the process, whatever date that is, maybe we have the budget pretty much set by November 30th, let's say. Then we look at what we expect to be in the retained earnings and determine where we want that to go. Do we want it in an emergency fund? That's money left over from what's budgeted,
And
so.
assuming that prior to getting to that, everything that we've collected up until December 31st of 2018 has already been distributed to the separate, and been earmarked for the separate things that it is for. And when we get the retained earnings from 2019, they are distributed among those accounts as they were earmarked for. In other words, the
But
replacement.
we'd have to do that now.
The replacement account, correct.
Yeah.
The replacement account would go to the retained earnings replacement fund for the water, because that's what it was collected for, correct?
If that's what we wanted, where we want it to go, yeah. Well, like Randy was
And
just
what I'm
talking
saying, I
about the
guess
general
maybe
fund.
we're talking about the same thing, but if that's where it was budgeted for, and in the budget, we have replacement, and matter of fact, in the narrative, it addresses it. There's a replacement and improvement department that is comprised.
And maybe if we've got 134,000 of retained earnings, it goes to reduce the unexpected rate increase that we were gonna do. It doesn't have to go to a project, it can go wherever we want it to.
I dispute that.
Well, that's just an example.
And let me finish what I was,
Where are you?
in this year's budget, page 5918, in the narrative,
Okay, hang on.
591.
8, under Department 891, replacement and improvement,
Too many pages. 591.8,
yeah.
okay.
The system is, the replacement expense is 223,572, and the annual improvements expense is 38,334. And I showed you earlier where those two numbers are coming from. You with me so far?
No. Oh, you're looking at the narrative?
Yeah.
Sorry.
591.8.
Well, I was 591.8 in the budget, because you said that's what you were talking about. Okay.
That's 2 items, that 38,000 for 2 items.
Okay, say that again, I'm sorry.
Okay, when you get into the replacement improvement department, which is 891,
Okay,
and you go about halfway down, and it says the annual system replacement expense is 223,572, and then it says the annual system improvements cost proposed for 2020 is 38,334. The 38,334 is the total of 2 approved CIPs in the improvements summary sheet that's on the back. And that leads one to believe that at the year's end, there's going to be $223,572 that have not been spent out of that replacement and improvement department. And that would go into retained earnings earmarked for replacement.
why would you think that would be left over? Is that the number that's supposed to be in retained earnings?
No,
I wouldn't assume that from the narrative.
why would you not assume? I assume that because it's a replacement and improvement department. It's a replacement and improvement account. the improvement portion is 38,344, the replacement portion is 223,572.
Yeah, so why would that be extra?
Unless you're replacing something, why would it be gone?
He's budgeting that he thinks it's gonna be, that's what I'm assuming, that's what he's budgeting to have replaced this year, $232,000 worth, or 223.
Can you guys address that?
Is that the case?
I don't know that I have a good answer, maybe Kirk does, the 223, 572.
Something has to make up
Was there a
that number.
plan
It's 591,800.
to spend that in 2020 on a specific project?
Right, yeah. The schedule that is listed on there is basically the depreciation schedule.
Right.
Okay, so that, as I said here, some of that's gonna change because we're working right now on doing those costs, those annual replacement costs, okay? And you're right, 70 years is gonna be different. And it was 70 years, and now it's 75 years, but whatever
75.
number you wanna use, that's gonna change as well, because the depreciation is generally referred to as a whole system, okay? Where your water main might typically last 70 or 75, or maybe possibly longer, but other components of that system are gonna have a shorter lifespan. So we have to sort that out
I
right now.
I understand that.
Okay, so that's
But
what it is.
But where the board directive came from is until a better number surfaces, 75 is it, not
Right.
50.
Right, and we're gonna use that, but only for the mains. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
And that's all I considered when
And
I
that
was
number might
looking.
go up, it might go down.
When I was looking at that sheet, 59114, that's all I considered was the in-ground infrastructure that was this pipe.
Right,
And that's why I come up, that's where I come up with just shy of $20,000. If you change the 50 number to 75, just shy of $20,000,
Well, and that might
what that
affect
budget
that.
would be reduced.
yeah.
And that is what, wastewater? And the water fund is almost 30,000. Doing the same thing. I didn't change all of those. I only changed the
Sure,
ones that were
right.
obviously in-ground water pipes or sewer pipes.
Right. Well, and we're doing the same thing. but
So
it's-
the
it's gonna
question
be more
is
components.
that money, that $232,572, is that going in there for future replacement of those pipes?
Well, basically, that's like an annual number, you know,
Yeah.
like you've already described, it's the
Mhm.
same way that we're gonna be doing it, okay?
And
Come
you
up with
foresee that going into retained earnings and sitting there until we need to replace those lines? Or you're,
So what that means is on an annual basis, it's gonna work out to that number right there.
He's setting aside $223,000 this year, like he does every year.
right,
To fund the replacement
Replacement
of all
of
this
those.
stuff.
that is not gonna be spent this year. It's just there to fund the eventual replacement of those pipes,
But it
correct?
might be
Well,
spent.
and what we're talking about is basically accounting, and so unfortunately, the accountant's not here today.
But
So otherwise, we're just,
You are gonna be replacing valves, valve boxes.
correct, but where I'm going with this is,
If you're not
okay,
75 years, the valve boxes and valves are not 75.
when we do in fact spend money to replace something, okay, it doesn't show up as an expense. It shows up as an asset, okay? So we got a new asset, so we start all over again. So in fact, we will spend that money.
Well, I would go
That's
back
what-
to the
yeah.
spreadsheet on,
We have 590 or 591?
Yeah, let's stay. in one account.
59112.
591.
And 2019, started out, it was budgeted at 320,953, and estimated total for year end is we're only gonna use 98,141, or what's that mean? We're only gonna get that much, 98,141?
That particular number, let's see.
To me, that means it's been spent.
Right,
98,141.
yeah,
So-
or accounted
That's
for,
the estimated total for 19.
right.
That's an estimate.
The estimated total that's gonna be spent, correct?
Correct, based on what's been spent so far.
Right.
is zero.
And remember, this was based in June.
I
too.
understand that.
Okay. we're
But,
just-
yeah, but look at the prior years, prior 3 years, on that same page.
Okay,
It shows nothing, correct, for the last 3 years? So what does show up though, Lois always puts this in there, depreciation, which is gonna be roughly the same number.
Okay, what do you do with it at the end of the year?
If there is in fact money left over, it would go into the fund balance, like you said.
Retained earnings.
The retained earnings.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
That's my point. That should not just be setting in retained earnings, it should be earmarked for replacement.
It can be,
For a project.
yeah. That's fine, we can change that if that's what you wanna do.
Well, if it needs to be changed, I don't know how Lois references that on the balance sheet.
It would happen before it hits the balance sheet.
And that's all I'm saying, is the balance sheet should reflect the
What year?
retained earnings, and it should also reflect underneath the retained earnings how that breaks out.
The org,
I believe it does.
I would
believe Lois
think it would go
does
the other
on
way.
her- on it. Now, she makes this adjustment at the end of the budget year. She makes the
Right.
adjustments on the balance sheet. But
That's why I said if,
I might be mistaken, but as I recall, looking at her worksheets, she does have, under the retained earnings, she has identified where in retained, what it's for. Because that was one of the things we talked about at the first budget session, we talked about this. She went back and looked at her balance sheets and made some changes to the balance sheets.
Okay, then I would have this question to hope to clarify the situation. If you just look at 2019 for a minute, we work on a balanced budget system, right?
right,
So the water department, this is waste, the water fund is balanced, revenue versus expenses, correct? That would suggest that out of the $320,953 that we anticipate earmarking for replacement and improvement, we're only estimating that we're only gonna spend $98,141 out of that. That leaves some $42,000 or something that's gonna be left over that hasn't been spent.
Through June.
No, it says estimated total.
But
Yeah.
that's estimated
But that's
based
still an
on what
estimate.
was done through June.
No, I understand that.
okay. So you're
Yeah,
saying,
that's
in
not
theory,
saying that in the
okay,
second
so
half
this
of
is
the
your
year.
theory.
Assuming that number doesn't
doesn't
change
change, right?
on December 31st of 2019, that $98,141 is still there, hasn't changed. That suggests that we have $240-some thousand left
Correct.
that now is gonna go,
Right,
I gotta get this.
if it doesn't change, and at the end of the year, that will be revisited. Oh, sorry,
I gotta get this.
hang on. But again, this is 0 through June. We have a major project going on that between June and December, that's likely to be spent in replacement and improvement of stuff that's being torn up at the highway.
Yeah, he's just saying that if, if it's November or December, this ends up being the number. There's
Yeah.
240,000 that's gonna get put into retained earnings, which is what he's saying.
Yeah, I
That
understand.
he should go back to repair and improvement or wherever we wanna put
And
it.
it does, a year end, Lois makes those accounting
It
entries.
still goes into retained earnings. What he's saying is, we budgeted it for projects, let's put it back into the projects and earmark them, is what he'd
And
like to see.
And what I'm saying is, this was put together predicated on nothing having been spent through June, so she took an estimate of what might be spent in the next 6 months, not necessarily conferring with Kirk about what's going to be done on the highway in conjunction with the roundabout projects, which may be $320,000
I
by the
think,
end of the year.
I think I see where the 98,000 came from, and that came from the approved 2019 CIP,
CIP.
which is $98,000.
Yeah.
That's exactly where it came from.
He's not talking about the money, he's talking about the process.
Right. You're talking about.
It could be,
Well, I understand, but
if
we
it's
did-
$200,000 of
Yeah, but we
actual,
did have it broken out. We had it totally broken out. Because we were funding, okay, so much per year for like improvements, for example. Same thing for replacements.
Right.
And I'm just saying, last year, the board directive was not to do that. You didn't want to, you only wanted to fund year by year. So that's where the $90,000 came from. That's all I'm saying. We can do anything you want, but you know,
Right.
You change every year.
Well, we're trying to get, I know where he's coming from.
Well, I do too.
We're trying to get to
But again,
putting
you're
the
talking to
money
the
on
wrong person,
projects.
okay? I can't make these changes. John can't make them and Randy can't make them.
You can in your budget if we are clear enough as to where we want them to go. And it's not gonna be in June or July,
A
it's
budget's
gonna be at
handed-
the end of the
The budget's
year.
handed to me, okay? I can put numbers in there, okay? But the different categories, that doesn't come from me.
Right, yeah, we can change, yeah, Lois would change
Okay.
those. Yeah, I get that part of it. I don't know how to
speak
accomplish
up, John.
what he's, go ahead.
I don't want to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
If you look at the estimate total under the 2019 budget, it's got the 98,141 as estimated what we're spending. The number directly below that, the 222,812, is what you get when you take the difference between the budget number and the estimate total. So the remainder goes to depreciation, which is basically going into your fund balance. Not sure if you followed that, but.
Yeah, but the depreciation should be a number in and of itself. It shouldn't be a difference between what you're spending and what you're budgeting.
It should be, but this is what we're actually funding at the end as projected when the budget was put together.
Yeah, the 98,000.
Sorry, that was McKenna School.
That's okay.
You assume McKenna got hurt.
Yeah.
I didn't hear a siren go off.
Well, all right. With all this being said,
Yeah, and that's where it's at.
how do we accomplish what, regardless of what you're saying, the point that we came across from last year when we tried to get this year's budget put together was we don't want to have excess funds sitting around.
Right.
We want to be able to earmark them, and that was the word we used, because again, it's not restricted, it's not any other budget amount, it's just an earmark. If we're gonna spend $50,000 based on this breakout, these pages get kind of crazy. The repair and maintenance, or the replacement account, $591.14. If we're gonna set aside $223,000 this year for these projects, and we don't accomplish them, and this is the way I'm understanding it, if we don't do the master meters this year, that $288,000 either needs to stay in that master meter account or go somewhere else that we feel that it should, right?
No.
No.
That $223,000 is for replacement or for depreciation of the infrastructure in the ground. That's what's estimated, correct? And so that money is there to be accumulated and eventually have money to replace that infrastructure that's in the ground, correct?
Then if it's gonna go into retained earnings, it needs to keep these, that's where it came back to, I said we need a separate account number for all of that stuff.
Right.
But that tied back to the CIP because they were bigger projects. If we're gonna spend $1,000 this month on repairing some of the valves, that's not, you don't need a separate account number for a valve that you're spending, but you
Well,
wanna.
actually, we've got repair and maintenance line items in a different part of the budget.
Correct.
That's different.
Yes, it is.
This is the $223,000 that I'm talking about, and I think you guys agree with me, is budgeted and collected so that based on anticipated depreciation of the products that we have in the ground, and you're not anticipating spending that money this year. You're anticipating collecting that money and accumulating it, so 75 years down the road, we have enough money in there so when it's time to replace it, we can just replace it and we don't have to borrow any, in an ideal situation.
Right.
You always end up dipping into that money for something greater good that comes along.
Which is what we wanted to have more control of.
And you have control of that. It doesn't matter if you put it in a committed account. You still have control over dipping in there.
We have control, but we haven't said in the past, yes, we're gonna take the $300,000 or $400,000 and put it on Grove Street to fix that part. Replace that part. We haven't done that. It came up, that was the cash we spent, that was the whole impetus for this discussion. It's because we took cash from this account and we paid off stuff that we had said we didn't feel should have been handled that way. This is what started this.
Right.
Okay. So if we're either gonna earmark this stuff or we're not. We don't have a lot of choice.
I think a good place to start out with is making sure the retained earnings balance sheet shows where this money was initially earmarked for. And this $232,000 is earmarked for replacement.
Right.
And
And
it
it
should-
needs to stay there,
It
is
should
what
stay
you're
there.
saying, right?
And there's a portion of the retained earning, and I imagine some of it, would any of that replacement money be under restricted funds, or would be all be unrestricted?
It wouldn't be restricted, no.
Okay,
Yeah,
That's
it's
so
only-
there's
only
a
debt.
portion of the retained earnings on that balance sheet we got that under the unrestricted water department, there's a portion of that balance we have that is already set in there and was collected for replacement, which should be under its own heading. And this $232,000 should be added to that,
Based on these accounts.
based on these numbers and how they
Right,
come out. I mean,
right. I
everything
agree.
changes, right? I
Yep.
get that. But,
And that goes to the balance sheet.
right,
And
and
it sits
it
there.
just needs to be shown in the balance sheet.
Yes, yes.
You can leave it all in one lump of cash sitting in somebody's corner, but it needs to show how the pile gets split up at the end of the day. So that when the board decides that, yeah, we've got $4 million sitting here for the replacement of water mains, but we have this greater problem that's because the Cox water tank's got a hole inside of it, and you need the cash, then you got a place to get the cash, but that's a board action.
And that shows that's what we're talking about, showing the moving of the
And
money, and
it's-
you have a negative in
And
there.
until it's
She said she. could do-
itemized as to where those things are earmarked for, you can't keep track of the money you move. And we've had that same discussion all year.
Over and over, yeah, for
And I'm just
for years.
suggesting that there's no better time than now to earmark that stuff. And so that when the end of 2019 gets here, the money that's here, and see, I don't see where the board has a big decision to make. If we collected $223,000 under the guise of replacement, then at the end of the year, what's ever left over and hasn't been used for something else needs to go to replacement in the retained earnings. And that's just where it goes unless we decide later on that a portion of that needs to go someplace else, but that's got nothing to do with where it initially goes.
And then we need to have the report, we asked for this last year, showing that the Northwoods tank has a balance of $100,000 in there toward that event.
Okay, everything that's itemized over here on
591.
591.14 should be itemized underneath the retained earnings
So
and shows how much money is there for that item.
the $3 million that it says that we have in that account, as of right now, this whole thing, at the end of the page, we should have this number, these numbers for each one of these amounts. We should have 1.2 million set aside for the well water system.
And I have no hope that we have.
We should have, it says that we've got $3 million.
I don't have that money.
It'd be nice to think that that's a reality, but whether it is a reality or not, we should decide how much is there, if not that exact
But
amount.
what this goes back to, and you're forgetting, is this is the depreciation side of it. And what we wanted to do was pull out. At one point, years ago, we had $700,000 sitting in the repair and improvement account. And a previous trustee said, what does that fund? This is where this started. How much of it is for vehicles? How much of it's for the Grove Street main?
And when it's sitting
it's
there
just
under a
gotten bigger and
repair and
bigger.
improvement account, I can understand the problem, but when it's sitting there and then replacement and improvement, I say separate those two
Yes.
accounts so you know how much is replacement, and then there's no question of what that money for. That money is for the replacement of the water system. It's
Well,
not,
that's why,
it's not to add on new pieces of infrastructure to the water system, it's for replacement of.
Right.
Well, that's why I provide two spreadsheets for that one line item, just because, again, that's the way the budget is set up per accounting guidelines. So that's why I provide two sheets to say, okay, these two numbers equal that one number.
Is there
And
any,
it's itemized.
is there any validity to my suggestion that
Yeah,
there's two separate accounts under that department?
right, I agree, yes. And actually, the
I
improvement
got a
is.
headache.
The improvement is no different in terms of, okay, obviously, they have to show up in the CIP, okay? It has to be a long-term CIP, not a one-year annual CIP. But which is a plan. You gotta identify what the cost is gonna be and when you think it's gonna happen.
Right.
So.
Money you're collecting
Under the same-
under a CIP
Right.
for 4 or 5 years should be left over at the end of the budget year 2, and that should go into
Right.
that CIP.
And
so
using
that
the
you know
same
what's there.
concept that you're using for the whole budget,
Mhm.
you know, for capital outlay, is you try to save money, right? To do what needs to be done. But you gotta be reasonable as well. I mean, if you got a multi-million-dollar project, it doesn't make sense to save $5 million, right?
Well, it depends on if you need a match or, you know, for the grant or deposit.
Right, yeah.
You still wanna have, it's
I mean,
like
there
we're
are
doing with the
certain
fire
cases where-
trucks. Same thing, we're starting the money aside.
Because I've been
It's
trying
not
to do
gonna
that
fund
in
the whole
recent
thing.
years, and I can't do much in a year.
That's not saying that you can't borrow some of that money out of one of those earmarked designations, because it's still going back in there
Yeah, but all you're doing is
to do
robbing
the
Peter to
bigger
pay Paul.
project. Wait, you're not robbing anybody because it's going back. The same as the loans we just did. From one.
It's going back over time.
It's going back over time, and it's actually gonna go back at a greater amount than it was taken away at. So you're not robbing anybody, you're just borrowing the money and saving some money in the long run.
So what we still have to figure out is, if this is a depreciation schedule, we need a separate report, and I remember saying this last year, that talks about how much money is in whatever fund that we are accumulating. If the $223,000 is what we're portioning out for each one of these for this year, that's either a depreciation number or it's a savings account, and they're intermixed, and they can't be on the same sheet. If you
Right.
wanna have a depreciation account, call it that, and put it separate. If we wanna have an improvement account that we are funding, and that would end up going into retained earnings and sitting there, and we wanna try to pull back, that's a separate sheet, it doesn't belong on here at all.
I understand that, but this dollar amount, 223,572.
That's what we're budgeting.
Was a depreciation sheet,
Right,
okay?
So
But
we
the minute
discovered
you
that.
put it on the budget, and you're now earmarking money that comes in 2019, that's not depreciation
Mm-hmm. I know.
anymore, that's money.
I know, we're basing the budget on depreciation numbers, and we want this to reflect money that we're budgeting for projects.
Right, and
Right.
I agree that you need, at the end of the year, you need to take the 223,572, if that's what's left, and it needs to be, each one of these need to be earmarked with a certain amount of money.
Yes, I
But
agree.
it's not a depreciation schedule anymore, it's a replacement
Well,
schedule.
and if you wanna have a depreciation schedule, you can do it on a separate page.
And the replacement schedule is not the same as the improvement schedule.
Correct. Yes. The replacement should be part of the CIP project process.
So what's that mean we're gonna do?
I don't know, it means trying to figure out how to convey this to Lois and tell her what we're trying to accomplish and have her tell us how that works.
Well, I would think you just need to take the retained earning balance sheet and break it down. Where, I mean, you got $10 in the retained earning balance sheet, break it down, where's that money earmarked for? There's $1 goes to this, and there's $1 goes to this faucet, and there's $2 goes over here. All those breakdowns should total up to the $10 when you get done.
But the problem with that is, because of the way it was handled in the past, it's a depreciation number. So she's not gonna know, it's defining that 700,000 that Papa was talking about. There are no numbers established yet. This is what we have to try to do.
See, I think that's making it too difficult.
No, it's exactly what we're
If
trying
you-
to do.
But if you, yes, it's what we're trying to do, but if you take the retained earnings sheet, and any one of this, the bottom line on the retained earnings for, just pick 12/31/2018, unrestricted is $1,973,832. The $700,000 aside, that $1.9 million is broke down into
What?
separate,
Yes.
different
What is it?
replacement, or
Exactly.
whatever it's
And what
broke
are
down
the, what
to.
are the numbers that go into each one of those? Yes,
And we get all done, it should equal $1.9 million and change.
yes. All right. So
That's easy place to start. Just break down that number right there
if
and,
I can get that explained to Lois, because she's way over here with me and I'm way down here. If I can convey that to her and have her figure out what I'm looking for, what we're looking for, that's where we need to start. If you want to start with that number, you want to use the 1.9? Is that
I want to know.
1231's account? Or
Yeah, I
balance?
would just start, but if you straightened out the end of the year 2018,
What page are you on?
591-17,
But again, the only reason that page is in your budget is because you wanted to see it from the last
Mhm.
meeting. It's not a budget item.
I know it's not a budget item.
And Lois won't have those figures in the budget. She
Right.
will show you the balance sheet
Correct.
where she has those numbers broken out.
And, but when that breakdown is in the balance sheet, and we're looking at their corresponding budgets that are in the
In the budget,
budget,
Yep.
we know where that money's gonna go when it's left over.
Right, but you
Yeah.
won't see it in the budget.
correct,
That's fine, I'm
correct.
fine with
That's
that.
why I'm
That's what
saying
I'm
we need
saying.
another report.
Yeah.
We need to waste more
And-
paper.
And I'm suggesting to you that that may already be being done on a separate report.
It'd be nice to think that.
Yeah,
Well, I think it is, you know.
He just told you that.
If you ask Lois what that 1.9 reflects, she'll be able to show it to you.
okay. That's what we'll shoot for.
So I have that, I would like to see the replacement and improvement department with accounts underneath it, one replacement account and one improvement account. And then if you need to add a contingency account to cover the improvement expense portion of that, that is a percentage that's yet to be determined, but I'd like to see those two broken out under, I think it's 891.
So
Yes.
separate the replacement from the improvement,
In the account, not in the department.
right. And you're thinking,
And then if you have to add a contingency account underneath that same department to cover the actual expense that's gonna be outgoing for the improvement side of that, then you do a contingency account, but we shouldn't come up short on the improvements dollars and automatically just slide them over from the replacement dollars.
so you're trying to identify,
Separate them.
yes, and your focus is on the replacement, correct?
Well, the replacement brings up whole other issues that we've already beat to death, but
So what I'm hearing you say is under 891.000 replacement improvement, you want a 957.001 replacement, 957.002 improvement.
there you go.
And a 003 contingency.
If you need a contingency, I'm not telling you need a contingency. If you need it, that's where that would go, right?
And it would be based on the definition, so it's a 5% of the department?
Is that contingencies based on that, or? is
Yeah,
that-
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it could be as high as 5%.
Well, I've already got a contingency for 5% for the whole.
For the whole thing, yeah, so some of that would have to
So
go
I
in
don't
there.
think you
if
need
think-
another one.
Well, and I don't think it has to.
Okay, as long as it's
As long as
in
the whole
the
fund
account,
has got a contingency,
fund.
that's fine.
yeah,
5% of the total.
okay. Okay, got that. And then I wanna try to see if we can get rid of that depreciation page, call it a depreciation page, and not have, if we wanna fund depreciation, that should be by itself.
Well, I think
That's
the
what I
only,
was
the
trying
only
to say.
useful point of that depreciation page is to let you know where that, Department 891 got that figure from. It took it off the depreciation page.
Yeah, but then it should be under depreciation, not
What
under
page are you
repair and
calling
improvement.
Depreciation page, what number?
Replacement.
14.
Replacement and improvement.
591.14.
Mine is repair and
Replacement
improvement.
projects.
Yeah. That's, and I distinctly remember crossing that off and putting depreciation on last year's budget. That's just a depreciation, but if we're gonna take the $223,000 and put it into the budget, it needs to go in the depreciation column.
It's already in the budget.
But it's under repair and improvement, or replacement and improvement, not in the depreciation.
I don't understand why you want to put it in the depreciation
Because
column.
that's what this number is.
Do you guys understand what you're saying?
I think so.
Do a whole session.
Well, yeah, but it's not really
Coughing now.
depreciation. 591.14 isn't depreciation.
Not
That's
all of it
that's
is.
That's accrual of funds to replace. the
And you see,
system.
Some of it.
When I budget for replacement, she does not budget depreciation.
Well, when you said over under 591-12, how much money am I gonna put in this replacement and improvement account? You flipped over here to 591.14 and you said, I'm gonna put
Right.
223,572
Right.
plus 38,344. That's where that number came from.
Right.
Once it enters up on this budget, it's not a depreciation anymore. It's money that you're collecting for a purpose.
Right.
To replace that system.
So it doesn't show up as depreciation until you don't spend the money, right? When you don't spend
No,
it at the
then
end
it
of the
goes
year,
into
you're
retained
funding
earnings.
depreciation, but you are funding depreciation that way.
No, the depreciation is a separate line item.
Yeah, I think that's actually semantics. It's going into retained
But
earnings.
that's how it ends up being
And it's-
reported.
Yes, and it's money that is just earmarked for replacement in the water fund.
And the numbers are gonna be very similar.
So, going back to what I was saying earlier, under the 2019 column, it started with a budget of $320,953, which was a combination of replacement
And
and improvements, right? Which we're going to break out separately. As the year was projected, the expectation was to spend 98,144 of the 98,333 or whatever it was. Whatever's left, because we're not replacing anything this year, ends up going into depreciation because that's what we're
ends up
funding in the
going
future.
into
Retained
retained
earnings.
earnings earmarked for replacement.
Right.
And the
But it shows up
water
as,
fund.
No, it's a
in the
separate number.
depreciation line.
Mm-mm, I don't think so. It's a
Well,
separate
that's how
number.
it shows up here. The math ends up working. I'm just telling you what I'm seeing.
When
not
you
having
look in the
prepared this.
retained earnings summary sheet, you should show an increase of by whatever that dollar is earmarked for replacement.
Right.
Because it's not just a depreciation number anymore, it's cash on hand, for lack of a better word.
So you're
Because-
saying,
Okay,
because,
so
Because
they're
we
not
collect
exactly the same by definition, I agree. It's how much of depreciation you're actually funding is what's
and
showing
you're
up
saying
in.
she's showing the
Right.
difference because she can't put it into retained earnings yet. She's showing it on the budget.
It's what she's projecting,
Yeah,
correct.
okay, that
Yeah,
makes
so that
sense.
doesn't go into retained earnings until December
And it might, the
31st of
number
the
might
end of this
change.
year.
Yeah, because if the 98,000
Probably more
turns
like
into
January,
100,
but- Yep,
the 98,000 turns into 150, then
Or
depreciation's
or
gonna go down.
320.
Yeah,
Yeah, and that's the
Okay.
reason I wanted to separate it.
got it, got it.
a lot of semantics, but I understand what your point is.
It's just transparency though, I want to know.
Sure.
When somebody asks me how much money is in there to replace our water system when it
Exactly.
starts falling apart, you should be able to go to the retained earnings balance sheet and look at the breakdown and say, this is what's in there for the water fund replacement. Right now, we've got $10 million. And it should be that easy.
And that's what came up, that was one of the other questions we had from somebody. If it says we're sitting on $4 million, well, what is it for? Is some of it restricted, is some of it depreciation, is some of it for the mains? That's what we're trying to identify.
All of the above.
Yes, D, none of the above. So let me talk to Lois and see what we're allowed to do with that, how we can, and get a definition for sure of that is 222 going to depreciation, and that's her methodology.
Yeah, as far as the budget goes, I'm not suggesting we do anything different with that budget except separate those two accounts. It should be the same numbers.
It's less explanation. in the
Unless we actually go and change that replacement project sheet with 75 years instead of 50, and then that budget amount will go down.
Yeah, I think we need a separate sheet for actual replacement projects, not based on depreciation.
Well, the sheet, 59114. If we replace the 50s on the in-ground infrastructure, if we replace those 50s with 75, the 230 or 223, 572 number is gonna be smaller by about $20,000.
If you crunch the math, I agree.
So that will change the budget by that much. And then I think over on the wastewater, it'd end up being almost $30,000.
Okay, let me work on that. Sorry for this coffee.
Really, you're only talking about impacting the mains by the 75 years.
Well, and I'm also suggesting that as long as you're going in and fixing the 50s to 75s on page 59114, you should also fix it on 59115. And I realize that is only there for has no particular effect on anything, except if it's supposed to be 75, it should be 75.
Well, but again, I'm not sure whether laterals should be 75 or 50. We're talking about different things, or hydrants aren't going to be 75. I mean, that's not going to change all the
The only thing the board directive did was it addressed in-ground infrastructure, which is what they were talking about, the mains.
In the 59115 that you just referred to as water improvements,
Yeah, so that 8-inch water
these are projects.
main and PRV valve on Brookton,
Yeah.
instead of 50 years, that should show
This is stuff that we
75.
don't have now.
Right. But I say it doesn't mean a whole lot, other than the fact that it's supposed to say 75. But I think that's all my questions.
That covered the whole budget, so it's good.
Sorry, guys, but
Until the next report comes in,
Makes me
not
crazy.
75, it'll only 65.
I guess it's not all my questions. Are we gonna put an amount? Does it actually show up that we're gonna fund a portion of the emergency reserve fund in the budget, or is that just whatever's left over at the end?
As I recall, that was a number. As I recall, that was a number. Wasn't it like operational expenses for, in our case,
It's
3 months
emergency.
or something?
Yeah, it's a definition.
Yeah.
Actually,
Should be a
it
number.
is.
In fact, Lois presented everyone with those.
It's a department that's categorized as committed, and it's covering revenue shortfalls greater than 2% of the general fund or 5% of the wastewater and water fund, and are for unbudgeted costs resulting for unplanned and/or catastrophic events.
In the general fund, that's the general fund balance.
And it says the emergency reserve balance shall not exceed 33% of the general fund budget and shall not exceed 25% of the wastewater and water fund budgets.
And Lois was tracking those on separate sheets, separate funds. That's where she gave you that report. But again, those figures they're captured from the budget, they don't show in the budget.
Okay. Okay, now I'm done. Quick. Do something else.
Any other questions on the general, or the water fund, wastewater, stormwater, sewer?
I have a couple.
Okay, shoot.
I don't have that long a presentation. I just have a few questions.
Shoot.
Either wastewater or water, doesn't make any difference.
Let's stick with water, just to be
Okay,
consistent.
let's go, wanna go for water then?
Yes.
Okay, let's go on sales on water, because this also gonna jump back into wastewater.
Give me a page.
591.1, the narrative,
Oh, narrative.
on sales, you're dropping at $50,000, okay, because they're not using it. Then I go back into wastewater, on sales, you're increasing it by 37,000. If you're not selling water, you're not pushing water through the wastewater plant. So what, can you explain this to me at this point in time? Why there's a
Well,
differential?
for the water,
Pardon?
for the water, there was a reduction, $50,000 reduction, because the budget number that I used last year, which of course, when I'm starting this year's budget, or next year's budget, I've only got 6 months, it appeared we were not gonna reach that number.
Not gonna do what?
We were not gonna reach my projections that I made last year for this year,
Okay.
so I adjusted next year. So the use is variable. I know in general, people are using less water, but that's just kind of a generality. We're still
guess-
growing, we're still growing.
But I guess Ernie's question is, if we're selling less water, how can we be processing more water as wastewater?
Because a lot of it, if it's raining, what kind of seed you're gonna have for that? You know, people aren't gonna be using their, people aren't gonna be using their
It's
lawns.
just the opposite.
Wastewater goes through the water system.
Right,
That's
but the
not right.
rainwater don't.
The only way you're
So
gonna
if you're
increase that is if you get
selling
new
less water,
customers.
how can you be processing more wastewater?
The only way you're gonna increase that is if you have new customers for next year over this year.
It just doesn't make sense to me when you look at all these reports you're getting on month-to-month basis. The water's going down 1% and we're not, and the wastewater's right there, so all of a sudden, you got a decrease one and an increase here, but you're not using any more water. To increase your wastewater, you gotta be actually using more water. You're pushing more water through than that. Maybe I'm not explaining it right.
No,
The figures didn't come out right
makes
to me
sense.
when I looked at
There's
it.
an $87,000 difference.
Well, more than that. So you got a 50,000 decrease in water sales and a $37,000 increase in wastewater sales.
Well, we're talking
It's an
cash,
$87,000.
so,
I know.
so the water, the wastewater costs more than the water.
The cost of the wastewater went up?
No, it's
It didn't
more
go up,
than-
it's always been higher.
The cost of operating.
So
is more.
it's not the gallons?
But it's directly related to how much is being pushed through the wastewater. Because you're
Well,
pushing it back onto how much water you've actually sold.
Right.
When you look at your monthly bills, it's a direct relation as to how much water you're using. When you look at the way you compute out your wastewater
right, because
charges.
it's based on, yeah, your water meter, right.
Yeah, so, if you're using less water, your sales on wastewater should go down. Sure, it costs more money on wastewater, I agree with that, but there's gotta be something in there that tells us why there's a big decrease here.
The correlation. is what
The
you're
correlation between the two doesn't come out right to me. And maybe you're right, but looking at the figures, I can't come up with it.
They're checking gallons for gallons.
Yeah, if you buy a gallon of water at your house, they're saying you sent that 1 gallon of water to the wastewater. That's the way it works. And it costs X number of dollars. So if you're buying less water or selling less water, you're pushing less water to the wastewater. The correlation isn't there, and I don't know why. I just got a comment, explain. Doesn't make sense to me.
Well, it could be right, it could be wrong. You know, you can't say.
That's right, it could be right, it could be wrong, but
It's a projection.
Can you have people who have not connected to water, but have wastewater?
Wells.
Well, no,
water.
but you can have,
Oh,
the new customers are like sewer customers. They don't have to be water customers, but they do have to be sewer customers if it's available. So,
So, yeah,
yeah.
that would answer.
I
your
thought,
so you'd have to have X number of those to justify the increase in sales on wastewater then.
Right.
to go up that much. That many new customers.
Well, we've always had that. We've always had a segment of the population that's on the sewer system but not on the water system, that still have wells.
So how do you get charged for the sewer system if you're not on the water system?
They still
Meter.
have a meter.
We meter the well.
Could
It
it
just
be-
doesn't make sense to me.
Could it
when
be
I look
simply a
at it.
matter of all of the people on water,
It's a great
um,
question. Great
a
question.
good portion of them do not use sewer, and now some of those are gonna use sewer?
Oh, there's that. I mean, there's some of that where we've got sewer extensions, but we've always had folks that are on the wastewater system but not on the water system.
Right.
They've got their own wells,
Yeah.
or they haul their own water. We've always had those, but it's usually a fairly small percentage of the population.
Well, and plus we've got water customers that had not been on sewer, but now they are on sewer.
Yeah,
So they could even be using less water.
but just the fact that
Whatever
the sewer
amount
caused that
they're
to
using
go
on
up, right?
sewer, it is extra.
And again, it's projection.
Yes.
Based on use, prior use.
Well, the sales from last year, there's a $30,000 difference between wastewater and projected. Well, no, actually, that'd be actual if it's on there for last year.
I just brought it up because
That's
just
a good question,
looking at the
though.
figures, it didn't make sense to me.
I guess the water operator's messing with that.
God, I gotta blame somebody.
Okay, I brought that up. Next one on page 591-2 is debt service fee. We loaned money from the wastewater to the water. And the wastewater is getting 1% interest on that.
Yep.
Now, they're talking about paying back the loan to the wastewater. And I couldn't remember if we had a specific time frame when it had to be paid back or not.
Yes,
Wasn't it
there
like
is.
20
It
years or
was,
something?
it was
ridiculous?
amortized for the same time that it was originally, wasn't it?
From memory, I'm thinking it's over a 10-year period.
But one was 6 years and one was 1 year deal?
Yeah, I've got it sitting on my table in the office, but it was basically a 1% interest.
Right.
One was over, I think one was over 10 and one was over 6 years.
I think the amortization stayed the same, the only thing that changed was the interest.
Yeah.
The question I'm looking at is, would it be beneficial for us to try to pay off one of the other long-term debts?
Yeah,
I had that had a higher percent.
Bring it up.
Pardon?
I had that written down, but I didn't want to bring it up.
Well, we did.
We said we were gonna do one or two first and then see how
Yeah,
that
Kirk
worked.
and I talked about it when we were putting the budget together. We talked about, should we add another one of them? We were looking at them probably next year or the year after, but thought it might be a little much for this year.
I
2020.
just felt that with 1% we're paying and the others at 3, 4, and 5%,
Right.
that would be beneficial for the township or even for the water department to pay off those faster.
Right, we looked at it, but once you've
two
exhausted
others.
these smaller loans,
Pardon?
we've looked at that.
Okay.
And once we get these paid off, you're gonna be only left with a big one. And what I'm suggesting is, right now, there should be an excess by not reducing, so leaving the debt charges to the customer the same. You know, we've done this in the past. In fact, in the past, we never change it for a big project. And we end up paying it like a 20-year loan, 6 years early, just by leaving the debt charges the same.
We had talked about that when one of these debts was paid off, we would not change the debt to the individuals.
I know, we have talked about
And
that.
That's what he
dollars would
did
go
right
back.
now. He's
Recently,
not-
but-
He's not raising anything, so.
But there was a prior board that
I
decided
know. This board,
more customers, every time you add a customer, debt service goes down. So
It didn't work.
that means that we're gonna be stuck with the original one. So I prefer this method, but once you exhaust these little ones, you know, we're just gonna be left with one big one. So,
I just think, looking at the percentages, 1% versus 3 and 4 and 5%,
yeah,
paying off the
no, I get
others.
that part,
I'm not talking about changing anything debt retirement for any of the customers.
sure.
That money will
The,
continue to go back to the debts.
We looked at the Grove Street land as a potential. If you look at page 5 under the miscellaneous, We had looked at that one, the Grove Street land purchase is currently at 3.25%. Should be paid off if we do nothing by 2024, we could shorten that. And the other one that we looked at was, which one was it? The parking lot expansion, which is, it's at 3.15%, and that's a long-term one. We talked about shortening that one as well.
That's the only thing I brought up when I looked at the percentages and trying to pay off some at a higher percent rather than pay off something that would be a low percent.
Yeah, it makes sense.
That would probably be good to put in the narrative, so we have a record of it, of the loan information. Instead of relying on somebody's memory, you know, what the terms of that are. What the original amount was that was loaned.
Yeah, we've got that, that's all documented.
Yeah, but I mean, it should be in here, so every
Well, but
board
again,
member
that-
knows.
But again, that's not
In the
something that should be
narrative.
in your budget.
Just in the narrative. It's a loan. It affects what's happening.
Well, we could expand, I mean, it's in there. And that's where I'm suggesting this excess
I just brought that up
money
to try
we
and get
use to go back to
clarification.
the wastewater fund
Mm-hmm.
to pay off these two loans.
And that's what it says, from the loan, or the
Right.
wastewater fund.
Right.
But
I understand
All I'm
that.
recommending is that we put what the dollar amount was, or how long that's gonna last, or. It says 6 years remaining on the DWRF debt, there's, you know, that's in here, that's important to know.
Well, we did, per your request, put in the change, which is gonna be an extra almost $63,000.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I'm saying. Plus, we got loans that, one, it was paid off this year anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
No.
So the $63,000 is above and beyond, including the loan from the wastewater fund, what was already be scheduled
Mm-hmm.
to be paid. So we're gonna have an extra $63,000 that could go to either one of those, whatever's remaining. I would suggest one of the shorter ones,
Yeah, and that's what Ernie was saying,
because
just
they're actually the highest
do a
interest.
higher interest one.
The old one is the lowest interest.
That's-
Yeah.
that's-
Would you do that on
No, pay them off, leave the debt service charges the same,
The same, yep,
and then we shorten up, we just automatically shorten up the
yep.
water.
Isn't that correct?
It actually would save you money.
Oh, yeah.
We can look at it the right way to do it
Yep.
overall, and that's one reason we did it.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
Page 5.
Okay, next one,
Yep, go ahead.
on page 591-4 on master water meters, I just have a question. Number 566, master water meter. Can you just explain that first sentence? Change reflects hopefully the end of the city of Marquette's suspension of the water supply contract and obligations in regard. What is that?
Well, the water supply agreement is, you know, we so buy one from the city. We have a contract to do that. There are lots of conditions of the contract. One is the master meters, which is meters actually that they use to
Okay,
send us water. We used to send them back water. Since that Johnson Control Industries project, which has been 3 years now, they have basically not done that. And the reason that hasn't happened is they put one city employee in charge of that project. So there's no department head, no other than the city manager, can't even speak to anybody except this one person about the Johnson Control project. So I asked the question directly of the people that were normally responsible, which would be like the public works superintendent, for example, and the utilities director. They said, you gotta talk to this other person. And of course, the other person has no idea what the contract is. So what the process was, the city would actually go out for bids on the master meters and all their large customer meters. And then we would do the same thing, not a separate bid, but we would go in when they bid it out. So we get our masters and all of our large customer meters. Well, basically, that hasn't happened for 3 years, and what I'm saying is, in fact, this year I ended up going ahead and doing our customer larger meters because we were getting quite a backlog. So you'll probably see a jump unless the budget got changed already, but this year. So next year, I'm just saying we're getting back to normal. That's all I'm saying.
I read that, I could not remember ever seeing that in the past, so that's why I had to bring it up as to why.
Well, it's definitely an unusual situation.
Okay.
Yeah, you and I talked about that before, when the impact, that doesn't have anything to do with the whole lawsuit water deal
No.
contract.
No, it's,
No, it's master meters.
Yeah,
This is a modern problem.
yeah, when the city started working with them. So it's a separate, is it an actual agreement we have with them?
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
that's why we went to court.
No, we're talking about two different things, with Johnson, with the city.
We don't have any agreement.
No, we have.
The city has an
no-
agreement.
We have no
That's what I'm
connection with
asking.
Johnson at
We don't
all.
have
And
anything,
their
okay.
agreement basically says, we're going to make all these improvements to save energy, and the project will be paid for, your costs will be covered, by the savings in energy costs over a 20-year period or 30-year, whatever the number, 20 years, I think. And they made certain assumptions, you know, the cost of energy is going to increase X amount per year. And the city signed it, so that's what the contract says. And then, of course, Johnson Controls also determines whether or not there's contract compliance. So it's kind of like one of those owner-build situations where, or not owner-build, design-build. So it's like the city doesn't technically own the project. Actually, it's no different than what we did with this building and the Public Works building. That was not our project. We were paying for it. There's no control. So, and for the city to deal with this, like I said, they appointed one person to deal with it.
So what do we need to worry about? The meter's not being upgraded, right? For the mains are
Well,
not being.
it's just it's just testing, that's all.
Oh, okay.
The
Testing.
testing of the meters, ensure accuracy and function.
Which is just a standard procedure anyway. The larger the meter, the more frequently it needs to be tested.
We don't
So
know
that-
if they're doing that?
That
We know
first,
they're not doing that.
Oh, you know, okay.
to Ernie's point, the first sentence of that paragraph should state that this change reflects resuming testing of our master meters, which have not occurred over the past 3 years.
Gotcha, yeah. And
it just
then,
didn't, I couldn't come up with anything, reading it, didn't make sense to me. That's all the things I have on wastewater, so someone else can jump in now. on
for
wastewater.
water, that's water. Did you have something on wastewater?
Yeah, I have a couple things on wastewater.
Oh, well, that's okay. Anybody have anything else on water? I already had all mine answered.
Dave kind of took the wind on everything I was going to do, so.
Yeah, all of mine were addressed.
I have on page 591.5,
I have 91.
there's a sentence in the bottom of it that says, "Does not have emergency power, needs a new motor control center." Didn't we approve a CIP for a motor control center?
591.5?
The
591.5.
generator,
Pardon?
the generator.
I think it's the new 5. I got the old.
We didn't approve a motor control center?
We might have approved it, but not like for 2019.
Oh, so you approved the CIP, but it's not been collected and done yet?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, got it.
We're working on it.
So that's the project.
So, and I guess just to follow up on that, wouldn't it be better to note in there that that's currently an approved CIP item? Save me from asking stupid questions.
Sure,
591.5 is where we're at.
yeah. So that's not in the narrative?
Yeah, it's in the narrative, but it just makes, makes the comment that it needs a new motor control center, which, when I read it, says, wait a minute, didn't we have an approved CIP for that? Which in fact we did, we just haven't done the work yet, so he just noted in there that the CIP for that's already been approved.
They just need to add to that sentence, needs new motor control center previously approved.
Well, there's nothing else on water right now. We could shift to the department discussion. We got about 20.
Anything on
27
wastewater?
minutes. Well, that might be a whole nother
Okay.
meeting. I just didn't wanna, I wanna try to cover this a little bit when we only have a half hour left.
Let's go. If there's no other questions on water or wastewater, just move forward.
Yeah, we can come back to it if we have to, and save wastewater for another day.
I don't think there's much change from last year, so. In stormwater and solid waste, other than a quarter going up in solid waste, that's the only change.
Yeah, unless
And
somebody
that's-
else has.
And that's a landfill driven item pretty much, so.
No, I think it's a typo, but I'm not sure.
I don't think we need to know how they're meeting.
Page 590-4. You've got a Department 575
Yes.
sewer system salaries. And then right at the bottom of that page, you've got a Department 575 wastewater collection system. Looks like that's supposed to be a 576 because on the following page is a 577.
Yeah, probably a typo.
You're correct.
Yeah, and your details are all 576.
So that's nice.
Good catch.
Are we gonna skip wastewater for now, or?
Well, if you don't have any more questions
I
on it.
have some on wastewater.
Now's the time.
Okay, I took care of that one.
We spend an hour in accounting practice, so I think we should be able to talk about wastewater. Because I think these meetings should be over.
Yeah, but we didn't expect this to be presented. I just don't wanna forget it.
You're
John,
gonna adopt the definition.
we can't do anything
You
here.
can't do nothing here.
We have to do it at a regular meeting. But we can. We can put it on the next agenda.
We did
We
already.
already adopted definitions.
I thought you said we didn't.
No, we adopted them on July 16th.
You're saying we just didn't use them.
We didn't use them. There you go.
I just have a question on wastewater, 590-5. And I don't know if this is the right place or not, but we sold 1% to chocolate. And I'm looking at the costs here. And it says going to calculate 8% of total flow is based on adopted plan. Okay. That 1%, we should have a decreased flow costs if we don't have the total amount from last time. Or
No, that doesn't impact the flow at all. What we sold was capacity,
Ownership, yeah, capacity.
Just-
which is the ownership. The ownership equals the capacity. So it's assigned based on the different demand anticipated. And it's based on average day, not average day, monthly average, I believe. It's the capacity, which equals ownership. So what that's going to impact is in the budget, let's see.
To me, capacity would be computed back as to ownership, what percent of ownership you have.
Yeah, let's say.
Capacity, yes, but not usage.
Capacity, but that
Not
doesn't
usage.
equal flow.
So let's say we had, I
Or
don't know what
usage.
number you'd use,
So
10
you're actually using
10
actual
million?
flow versus, okay.
And we know we're not gonna get the 10
Remember,
million.
they wanted the
Give up.
extra capacity because of the expansion of the tribal operations, which have not expanded as yet.
But I'm saying the flow is going to increase,
Okay,
which coincidentally coincides with what I said
okay.
in the wastewater budget.
You explained it. I had my notes, I didn't know what it was, so I got it explained. That's all I have.
Anything else?
On
I just
wastewater?
got one thing to add to that. That's that number is actually, that's what's metered. So one of the things that we have discovered and other communities have discovered as well is we've got a pretty tight system, at least the newer part is, you know, the pressure part. But we're getting more and more extreme rain events more frequently. So, and we do have these peak lows that you know, you can graph them and it happens, you know, it's springtime. Where you get rain, you get runoff. Anyway, more of it's getting into the sanitary sewer, more than what people are actually using in their homes. So that's also that number. So we get charged, we got a master meter, you know, right at the entrance point to the, with the city there. So that number is going up.
And you can identify that number? I mean, you know what's excess going in from runoff?
I can't yet, not on a, no, I can't give an exact number. I just know that the peak flow does jump up, but we're based on like a daily.
When we have those extreme events?
Right, yeah. But I think what's happening is, because it didn't make a lot of sense, because I know the turbine system is pretty tight because it's a pressure system. And if that were leaking, it'd be coming on the ground, right? So I think what's happening is we still have a lot of those. There's still basement flooding that, you know, you've been dealing with in the context of alleged road drainage, right? So, but my point being, the code requires, plumbing code says your footing drains have to be connected to sanitary. But the point of that is not to drain the great outdoors, it's to, you know, if you have a leak or something in your house. So we're still getting a lot of people that are pumping into their sanitary. So then if it just goes into the grinder pump, then that's going to be pumped out to the main. So.
And it obviously didn't go through your water meter.
Right.
Makes sense.
Then, on page 590-6, grinder pump, it says you don't have an odor, the lift station does not have an odor control, that's Center Street, but later on you went back and said you have a odor control going in on Center Street, correct?
Yeah, that was an approved CIP.
Right, yeah, in the future, yes.
Yeah, okay.
That was, I was gonna tag on his comment on 582 lift
Yeah.
stations. The same comment, that last sentence says, the 2010 lift station does not have an odor control. Actually, that should be stated that that's an approved CIP.
And back here it says, states that it's a CIP, and so.
And as long as we're on that page, 577 on the garage, there's a sentence on the bottom that says structural upgrades and additional insulation for the old section of the roof need to be performed. Is that in the budget, or is that just a statement that it needs to be done?
It's not in the budget, but it does need to be done.
Why wasn't that done the last time they when they remodeled? Is that the old part? Or?
Well, the old part was basically remained. Basically, we expanded it.
Right.
And kind of remodeled the interior, but basically had the same, you know, framing and the same roof.
Okay.
And again, this year, it's another, getting back to the climate change again, there are lots of those buildings, pole buildings, which is essentially what this is, collapsed last year. And we had reached a point where the frame was twisting and bending, and you could actually hear it pop. And so we had it looked at by the original contractor initially. That's the first thing we did. And he said, well, this is not safe. We need to get out of here. So we called a structural engineer like the same day, and he showed up the same day. And he did a quick inspection. Then I requested, can you develop some plans for upgrade? And he got those back pretty quick. But then we need to implement those plans, which is, I'm trying to get that done right now, but it's a little bit of hold up with the engineers. So I don't have a cost or anything at this point.
So the building that will be corrected.
Yeah, basically it's
From
just,
the beam twisted in that this upcoming season, we're gonna have that corrected?
Well, it was mainly from the amount of snow load that we had at the
Right.
time exceeded the structural capacity. The inspector came and looked at it and said that, removing the snow load from it basically put it back, but there are some strengthenings that we need to do in the purchasing process.
Okay.
yeah, basically it's purlins, so we're gonna basically make the purlins half the spacing they are now, and also beef them up. So they're basically just little metal beams. They're gonna be doubled
All right.
and then spaced twice.
I know we were working over there, I just thought, well, why didn't we catch that to
And
start?
it was not just the snow load, it was also ice and water,
Right.
which was kind of surprising to me, but, so you end up with a way heavier load than snow.
Anything else on that? Okay. Now we have 15 minutes. I don't know which of you are the boss of what was recommended, if you want to both comment, or,
Well,
They're actually proposals, in response to board concerns. The current superintendent and the incoming superintendent have been looking at some options and presented preliminaries to you at your last meeting. You wanted a little more information, so that's what they have for you today.
yeah, we've discussed this, John and Randy and I, and we're all in agreement about what we'd like to do. But I'm gonna let John speak to it since he's gonna be the one that's gonna have to implement this.
okay? Go ahead, John.
So I guess, first of all, are there any questions regarding the information I provided? Make sure that the assumptions I itemized are clear. And then the schedule I showed you actually adds another color. I didn't know that I was appealing to somebody's desires, but glad I did. I only added the superintendent and billing clerk just to reflect what the total head count for the department is at each hour or half hour throughout the day. It also shows how the well operator and crew leader schedule aligns with what will be my schedule come January, what my schedule currently is, just because those two particular positions are very important to maintain proper, efficient communications between myself and the rest of the crew. So, and then of course the lunch or meal breaks that are shown there are just an assumption. It just breaks the split or shifts, breaks each shift in half, 2 4-hour increments. If it ends up being something different, I don't know that it matters that much. It's just representative of a typical shift.
Have you talked to the staff about this yet, or is it just preliminary because it's
Well, at
proposal
this point, it's
phase?
a preliminary discussion
That's what I
with
wanted
you
to
in
make sure.
response to your concerns that you raised.
Mhm.
Any idea what the impact of
I
budget
was
is?
just gonna say that.
There's 3 different impacts. One, the proposed revision to the job description for the crew leader, which I don't know what the numbers are for sure. Randy might know better, but we're assuming there's probably going to be like a step increase somewhere around there, I shouldn't say what the numbers are because I don't know them off the top of my head.
Yeah.
And we haven't really plugged hard numbers into this until you decide whether or not you want to pursue it.
Yeah, and then the value of 1 new employee, likely at the low end of the totem pole, with benefits, that's 35% of the salary roughly. I don't know what the starting wage is actually either. That's all part of the information I still have to learn. Could we calculate them pretty quickly? I think so.
Yes.
And then the shift differential is really going to depend, that total cost, on what we decide moving forward that shift differential is going to be.
Do we have an industry standard?
We do. The average appears to be somewhere in the 50 cent an hour range, but goes as low as 25 cents. So
Okay.
those that are at the low end are trying to get to where everyone else is currently.
Well, the impetus for this was reducing overtime. That's the
Correct.
big thing. So,
Well, it's actually two things. One is you were concerned about, number one, the amount
The
of
coverage.
overtime that's
Yeah.
being done. And number two, the same as the discussion with the fire department, expanding the potential service to the residents.
mhm.
Basically what, in essence, you're talking about in this proposal that's been kicked around is increasing the number of staff members and then correspondingly increasing the number of covered hours until 8 o'clock in the evening.
Which ties into the overtime anyway.
Is there any way any of this affects the on-call stuff?
There will still be on call, obviously. Suspicion is that it'll have some impact on reduction because we're expanding hours until 8 o'clock, potential 8 o'clock coverage. And a lot of the call comes when people get home from work. That's when
Not
people
working.
discover issues. I'm not saying that that's going to significantly reduce call out, but it'll have an impact. Sure.
Will these be rotating shifts then?
That's what the proposal is, to be fair to all employees, that 3 service workers per shift, every increment, whether it's 2 weeks, a month, whatever we decide on in the end, they would switch from first to second, and vice versa. That way everyone gets an opportunity to work until 8 p.m. and get the shift differential pay, or work a normal shift. Just switch back and forth.
So again, if this is something that the board wishes to pursue, at that point, we could put some numbers to it, estimated numbers, and get it back to you. You can't take any action, at a work session, that you wanted to have the opportunity to take a look at it and to ask any questions.
I think we should pursue it, get the hard numbers to it.
If we can get some hard numbers for this, or fairly hard numbers, so we know where we're going in that, then.
I think it's the right way to do for the future, so.
If this was a direction that the board wants to go as part of the 2020 budget, we could put it together in proposal format for your consideration November 5th if you want.
What becomes the status of the, does their status change for the well operator and the crew leader?
Crew leader would assume additional supervisory type responsibilities, and depending upon how the posting and bidding goes, that may also impact the water operator position to some extent.
What I've proposed here has no impact on the job description for the water operator. It would maintain that position within the department. There would be an expectation that on days when the crew leader is actually not here, that the well operator would be the next in charge. That's why they're both working the same shift. So there is that impact, but I think that's already exists to some extent.
Correct.
Other than that, no other changes other than to the job description of the crew leader, which comes with more responsibilities.
Do we have to do any extra training to shift this?
Depends on the posting and bidding process. Obviously, there would be minimum requirements that would have to be met, but with regard to the crew leader's position, depends on how the posting and bidding goes, it may or may not.
Based on the current staff we have, not necessarily in direct response to your question, but depending on how the posting goes, it could.
So because we're changing the job description, we have to repost it?
It's currently vacant, so it's got to be posted either way.
Right. It has to be
Okay,
posted
not
regardless.
because of this? Okay.
Correct.
You would have, at any event, if you want to go in this direction, there would be multiple postings. There would be postings for the currently vacant crew leader position as is modified, and new employees, new staff.
Have the crews seen this and how do they think about it?
No, we haven't even,
No, that's what I asked.
it's resting with you as to whether we're going to pursue it. That's, came out of discussion in the budget process, and, that's how it's coming back, so.
I have a question that may be a sensitive issue, maybe I shouldn't even be talking about it, but anyway, what the hell.
When has that ever stopped you, Dave?
Yeah, that's what I would just say, what the hell about. The on-call situation. My understanding of the way that works is the person who is on call, when he gets the call, he gets paid additional to go out, but he gets paid X number of dollars a week to be on call. Correct?
I believe that's true.
Normally, the on-call person, when he gets the call, depending on what the issue is, may or may not have to put out a call for additional people to go out and work.
Correct.
So when, my question then is only addressing the weekly stipend that they get for being on call. Has any consideration been given to enhancing the crew leader or well operator's compensation to cover the weekly on-call?
That's actually a thought that I had, but we hadn't discussed it amongst ourselves at all, because I had the thought basically overnight. These things come to me sometimes as I'm falling asleep or waking up, or maybe I wake up in a nightmare thinking about it, I don't know, but.
And I guess the way I look at that is that if the crew leader, for example, was the on-call person for this week, and he got a call after hours, he's gonna call somebody anyway, right?
Possibly.
Sometimes.
So
if
it's
it's
just
an
a-
intrusion
it's just a
on-
matter, I mean, if it's just pushing a switch to reset an alarm, or if there's something wrong, he's gonna.
Usually it
have to
takes
call
two
somebody.
people if they have to replace a grinder.
Right, but you're gonna have to call somebody out anyway.
Right.
Possibly, yes.
So it doesn't always mean that he's gonna have to be the guy to go out and do anything, other than take the call, determine what's going on, and call out a crew if he needs it. I just wonder if you couldn't roll that into the job description responsibilities, increase the pay
Well,
accordingly.
that is part of the job restructuring. The crew leader will be assuming additional responsibilities that will be reflected in the hourly pay rate.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if it would be expanded to the point that it would eliminate the on-call thing.
It wouldn't eliminate it totally, because there's still going to be times when, as you rotate through the staff, the call rotates through all staff, crew leader included. So on those times when the crew leader is scheduled to be on call, they would get the stipend for that.
Yeah, and I guess what my question is if we give any consideration to eliminating the on-call and putting it with the well operator and the crew leader on a rotating basis.
But then you'd have to put it on everyone, because they're all gonna be.
No, he's
No,
saying just
I'm
put it
saying
on them.
eliminate the on-call for everybody else. Actually answering the phone and go and see what the issue is.
Well, limited to them two people.
Yeah.
We can think about that in greater detail.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I bring it up,
Yeah.
is if anything's been given any thought to that.
Yeah, and that piece is a negotiation item, because it's specifically addressed in the contract, which is currently open for that subject.
Well, I guess what I was wondering is the crew leader is a job description you're doing now anyway, right, or changing?
Correct.
The on-call portion for the field crews is just, this is what they get paid if they're on call, doesn't mean they have to be put on call.
Yeah, they're on, it's a rotating call, they're assigned to call for a week. Yeah.
Right, but there's nothing to say they have to be assigned a call. You don't have to have an on-call person if you elect to include it in the job description of the crew leader, for example. Or
Of the
the,
two
and
people.
the well operator.
And the well
If you
operator.
include it in the job description for two crew leaders, well operator to crew leader, if that was in their job description and they were paid accordingly additional for that, I don't think, if I understand the contract right, there'd be nothing that says you're changing the contract, you're just not assigning anybody other than those two people to the on-call.
I'd have to take a look, I don't recall the language right offhand, but there is a.
Anyway, you see where I'm headed with that?
Yeah, I do, I see what you're asking, but there is a specific on-call article, basically, that applies to all.
And I'm not
I'd have to take a look at it.
in detail with the
Yeah.
contract, I'm just posing a question.
Yeah.
What you're
take a look at it.
proposing is
Sure.
exactly the situation I had in Ishpeming to a point, in that as the superintendent, director, whatever you wanted to call me, of Public Works in Ishpeming, I was the first guy on call, 24/7, 365. I'm not saying that was ideal, because I became married to my phone, and there was no such thing as a true vacation. But every call that I could take, I took. And then it was my responsibility to find the staff necessary to resolve whatever the issue is. And usually it started by calling the foreman. And then he would call the assistant foreman or whoever was next in line.
And that's all I'm suggesting, except instead of just saddling one guy with that, you would split it up between two guys so there wouldn't be 365.
And you bake it into the job description so that
Yeah.
the compensation is already reflected,
Right.
as opposed to a separate.
Right.
City of Marquette has a similar structure. They have, they have their superintendent of public works who has then 6 supervisors. Those supervisors take the call and then they find staff. The staff doesn't get any extra compensation for going on the
In
call.
our case.
Well, they're gonna get, staff's gonna get paid it. In our
Normal
case,
rate.
an after hours call and you find somebody to go out and work on it, they're gonna get paid anyway
Right.
for going out to work on it.
Whoever responds.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just talking about
Goes overtime.
researching a way to get rid of the on-call
Understood.
Possibility.
Kind of.
and roll it into a job.
We'll take a look at the language and see if there's a way we can do that without.
Violating the contract.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's why I just raised the
Yeah.
question. I didn't say I had the solution.
How often is there a call on a monthly basis?
Right now,
On average, just on average.
always. We have
Yeah, always up.
somebody on call every
No,
day.
how
No,
often do they
on call.
have an actual call?
Well, quite often.
Chad was on call last week. I think he said he had 3 calls during the course of the week.
For the week?
Correct.
Is that 5 or 7 days?
7.
Yeah, but then you're also gonna see in in this particular pay period, there was a lot of calls, like 53 hours worth of call out.
You'll see on the
Some
overtime,
because
the
of
grinder
this-
pump.
Well, some because of the our portion of the construction on the roundabouts. Others because of a jetting issue at the Westwood Mall, and grinder pumps. There was a variety. It was a very sizable amount for this last pay period.
So that's unusual though.
Yeah, that was unusual. But on average, over the last probably 6 pay periods, it's averaged fairly low, maybe 8, 10 hours over the entire crew.
That's
But
all I have.
you go through peaks and valleys. I mean, there's, sometimes of the year, you get a lot of calls, a lot of grinder pump calls. Thanksgiving, Christmas, we'll have a lot of grinder pump calls. Phones getting down in the grinder pump, other materials getting down in the grinder pump, just because of increased use.
Yeah, I'm just suggesting that as long as it's a topic, restructuring is a topic of discussion, that might be something to consider along the way.
Certainly take a look at it, yeah.
It's something that I had thought about too, just because that's similar to what I had experienced in past employment. I just didn't have enough answers on my own for that, so.
Most of the call-outs are single individual call-outs, unless it's something like, as Kirk mentioned, a grinder pump that has to be replaced, or something has to be jetted, or something like that, where those require 2 people or more.
Yeah, but sorry, you usually got 2 to 3 people on a grinder pump.
Yeah.
How often does that grinder pump need to be replaced that, say it's after hours at night? Can that be put off until the next day?
Now, they only hold up to, I think it's 40 gallons, I think, so it may have to be pumped.
Well,
And then-
what we normally do is, we automatically, if there's an alarm and it's not
Reset?
easily fixable, we go ahead and replace the pump anyway, and that's what requires 2 people. And then, but we pull one out, put one in, so the customer's not out of service, and then repair it the next day, or do whatever it needs.
And is there a better pump, grinder pump out there, Kurt? I think I've asked you that before.
No, there is not.
Okay.
Not for our application, there's not.
Anyway, if we're looking for a consensus, I say we move forward
Yeah.
with this and consider that other stuff. And I guess the next thing is to see how it affects the budget.
John, did you have something?
Well, I agree. I think they're looking for a consensus of the board to continue to pursue this concept.
I'm a yay.
Right, then at this point, then this would be where, if it looks like the board is gonna seriously consider this, then we'll be meeting with staff. To bring them up to speed on what's being talked about.
We only have two on board as far as I heard.
No, I'm fine.
I brought it up first,
Yeah.
you were sleeping.
I think it's consensus, yeah. Look at the numbers.
Let's get some hard numbers and facts on it and move forward.
I don't care if you talk with
Sure,
staff,
staff,
but it's
so,
still
true.
kind of preliminary, because we
Well,
could
it's
look
still
at the numbers
preliminary,
and
but
say,
if we're
no,
gonna
this
start
is not.
talking numbers and things such as that, and revision of the job descriptions, we need to bring at least the leadership of the bargaining unit into the
Oh, that's
discussion so
fine.
they're aware of it.
But just because we're pursuing it doesn't mean it's gonna go.
True, but
Once
to
we see real
basically
numbers.
give them a heads up in terms of what's being looked at, so.
At the last meeting, you did say you just wanted to talk about the concept. You didn't care what the numbers were.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, that's changed. You do
Well,
care
we'll
about the numbers?
run numbers with it.
Now we care.
Now we care, because we got enough information
I think we had some
to talk about it.
rough,
and
I had some
tell them.
rough numbers to begin with, so that can kind of roll into surround in terms of if the board wanted to go in this direction, what impact might it have on the budget and on potential rates of customers and a variety of things. Okay,
Okay. Anything else? Till next time?
Do we have any more work sessions for budget?
we do not.
Not right now scheduled.
I don't think we need any.
I think maybe that's the question, do we have anything that we should be considering at the next meeting?
I'd like to see some of the changes in what they do.
Okay, let me get together with Lois. Is she just gone for today?
She's
Or-
on
Yeah,
vacation
next
this week, she'll be back Monday.
Okay,
Was it Monday, Randy?
I think so, Monday, yeah.
okay. I'll try to catch her next week. Probably not Monday. I'm sure she'll be overwhelmed.
I think if we had to put in one more work, if we had to put in one more work, if we had to put in one more work, if we had to put in one more work, if we had to put in one more work, if we had to put in one more work, if we had to put in one more work, if we had to put in one more work, if we had